Okay, excellent. So yeah, thank you very much for still being around. I'm going to give you an overview, really, a couple of new developments, and very briefly some ongoing R&D. I think you've seen already a bit some of the R&D stuff that is ongoing, some of the interest that we have in terms of developing new countries, even besides just presence. So very quickly, a couple of updates on that. I'm not going to talk about zirconium and titanium. We're just going to stick to gallium and germanium. Copper has become quite interesting. A couple of updates. Lanthanide is a pretty big topic, mostly focused on type 161, but lutetium 177 is really the really hottest topic at the moment. A couple of updates on TK221, some data on TK222, both mostly within the direction of actinium-225, which in the RadPharm world is the very hottest ticket right now. And that requires work of radium-226. So let's not talk on that. A quick reminder on TK222, and then a couple of new stuff. Okay, so again, really just a quick reminder. Gallium-68 has become very, very popular. The easiest way to get this is really through generators, germanium-68 generator. Hard to get, the delays are quite long, pretty expensive. So we see a pretty strong uptake in interest in producing gallium-68 by cyclotron from zinc targets, liquid or solid targets. And the titanium is actually really quite suited for that. If you look at the selectivity, it does show high gallium retention in low acid, HCl and H103, as well as a very high hydrochloric acid, with a bit of a dip at 2 HCl, which allows for elution. So low acid is quite often used generally used for liquid targets, mostly dilute nitric acid, and solid targets are usually dissolved in strong HCl. So basically, the resonance is actually suitable for work with both type of targets. As I said, the elution is basically no selectivity for zinc, which is extremely low, which is quite helpful. So elution taking place 1 to more HCl, that's not really very suitable for labeling or for injection. Generally, in that kind of applications, people try to avoid noise to evaporate and redissolve, especially if you're working in a hot cell. So we were looking for a way to basically just convert the gallium fraction that was obtained into something that's more suitable. And actually, to get to 100%, which was made for something completely different, as it has shown. It is very nice for taking up actinides from pH 2, higher uranium and sodium uptake than Utica. So very nice resin for actinide chemistry. By playing around, we found it's actually pretty good for that special application. The conversion of gallium from very high hydrochloric acid to dilute hydrochloric acid. So sometimes it's important to play around in the laboratory. So basically, we've come up with a method gave that to a couple of people, and especially Kate and Johan from GE have really optimized it very thoroughly by adding a step, rinse, to turn up in various forms all over the place. Sodium chloride HCl. What you have to remember is our resins are a little bit like a reservoir for acid. So once you load it with a strong amount of acid, it tends to go into the organic phase and bleed out when you're eluting. So even when you elute with water, you're not eluting with water at the end of the day. You're even, especially in the beginning, you're eluting with fairly strong acid, which is causing a couple of problems from time to time. In that special case, it's a bit problematic. So by rinsing out the strong acid, or 2 more HCl, with a sodium chloride HCl solution, you're then able to elute really in dilute acid, which is very important in that special case. So very nicely optimized method, quite widely used. So that's for liquid targets. For solid targets, again, you can use the same resin and resin. So nice application from group in Canada. Activists that are using ZF and a resin between and TK200 for solid targets, producing extremely high amounts of gallium-68, so we'll run 10 curie and more. So the Americans are using, sorry about that. Now then Canadian, but no. So that is that is something that is quite popular. Again, by playing around in the lab, we've seen that the TK400 is actually doing the perfect job in this one without any need, technically speaking, for the TK200. So you can load the gallium onto the TK400 in very strong acid. I'll show the dilution study in a minute. And then you can dilute directly with dilute HCl. So the first group that has used that on a cyclotron was William Thieu from Sunry, was using a single TK400 cartridge. Found that in terms of purity, it was not quite as good as the more involved ZR-TK200 method, so didn't really go much further. Then we rediscussed again with the GE guys, with Johan and Katie. They have been working on ZR resin for some time, and for the solid samples, they've moved on to TK400. It's more selective, higher yields, better flow rate. So the TK400 is starting to get really much more into the use for solid thin targets when it comes to producing gallium-68 by cyclotron. TK400, that is probably the simplest resin that we have. Just a launch and alcohol, really nothing else. Particular chemistry, it really just takes up things, elements, very few actually, from very, very high HCl. I'd say probably, there are a couple that are retaining at 6, like iron, for example. But generally, you have to work 8 to 10 molar. You can go further, but then you start to get uptake from funny elements that you don't necessarily want to extract, like titanium and to a certain extent zirconium. So you want to stay at about maximum 10 molar. So it retains protactinium. There's been a lot of nice work here at NPL on protactinium separation. And the graph on the lower left is from Peter. And then other applications, more analytical, is molybdenum niobium separation, iron separation, quite nice. Gallium, and it is very suitable actually for polonium separation. It's a fairly good chance that the polonium retention of the strontium is actually not the crown ether who's doing the job, but it's the solvent that is the diluent that is used in the strontium. So as you see on the right for the TK400, the target material and potential impurities like nickel and zinc just wash through together with any copper, for example, that might be there. Then you can dilute the gallium and dilute HCl. And the G method is a bit different. They dilute 2 molar, go to get 200. But at the end of the day, it works pretty much to the same. So TK400 is a very simple resin that at the end of the day has a couple of nice applications. You'll see later that it can be used to move gallium, from copper. I'm not going to show that, but you can use it to remove iron and niobium upfront. That's zirconium 89 separation on TBP, just to remove the problem before it gets to the column simplified separation. It can replace TBP resin. If you don't want to use TBP resin in the copper method that I'm going to show later, you can just switch it with TK400. And as I said, you can use it for gallium separation. So again, simple resin with a couple of nice applications, likely. Just very shortly, that's really an update. So we have been working quite a lot on the called optimization of the method for germanium-68. And funny enough, that's why it's sometimes difficult to say a resin is selected for something. So you use the ZR resin under some conditions. It's beautifully selected for gallium. You use it under different conditions. Like in this case, you can actually use it to separate, for example, germanium from really, really large amounts of gallium. So it really depends on the mixture, resin, and condition. And that's really what gives you the selectivity. Quite nice, you can use for this special application, germanium separation, all acids. Usually people don't try to avoid HCl because of the volatility of the germanium chloride, but you can use nitric acid, or in this case, sulfuric acid. So the test has been run in about 5 gram gallium nickel. You can go higher, I would say, but that is what we've been testing. If you use much less, you can probably just get away with 1 ZR resin cartridge. But really to get to a very, very pure product was requested. The separation was going through 2 cycles on ZR resin, load from sulfuric, then dilution and citric, reacidification, rinse with the sulfuric, and then dilution and citric acid. that works quite well, and the product that you get at that point already is extremely pure. It's just citric acid is not very popular. With the people that are actually using the germanium after that, so you have to convert it to a dilute HCl. That's something we do on card resin. You can use pre-filter, but we tend to prefer card resin as it has selectivity for germanium over gallium, so given extra separation. Step at the end of the day, certification to at least 9 molar HCl, load on the card resin, germanium sticks to the resin. A bit of a rinse just to get rid of any last impurities and the citric acid. Then very carefully diluting with water. We really want to push it as much as you can, just to be sure that your product is not too acidic. But the citric acid has been working really quite nicely. It tends to tail a little bit, so in order to get really high yields, which is fairly required for the germanium separation, you need fairly large dilution volumes, which is making the method a bit slow. So at the moment, we're looking at the first test, they're really looking quite nice. Just using warm water, that seems to do the trick too. It's probably more to warm than water. Water is really just to avoid having citric acid in the system, which might simplify the separation at the end of the day. So that's certainly something where we might change our more standard method in a way for the germanium separation and replace the citric acid just by, if that's possible, in the respective sector by warm water. Okay, so that was, let's say that was the gallium kind of complex of the presentation. The second most popular, I would say, isotope for PET imaging right now would be copper 64, also followed by copper 61. And we're indeed using TK201 resin for this separation, already been used before for magnesium separation. Turns out that's actually most users right now would actually use it for copper separation. What is particularly you have to separate the copper from solid nickel targets, which limits the resin that you can use a little bit. In the origin method development, we're currently following the ion exchange chemistry, low rinse to recover nickel, which is very expensive, so you want to recycle that at the end of the day. It's really quite expensive. Cobalt dilution for 5 mol HCl. And over the last couple of months, we have got an increased number of requests for cobalt separation in the same context. So coming back to it a little later, actually that might be a good reason for separating cobalt from the nickel targets too. Then originally when diluting copper with fairly high HCl, just straight off the column, which was working kind of fineish, but the acid concentration was too high, and there's still a couple of traces in the iron product, so we were really quite happy with that. Instead of trying to optimize the anion exchange separation in a way of TK201, we tried to simplify our life, put a cartridge up front, TPP, or you can use TK4, which is during load is already removing iron and gallium, so you don't have to deal with these anymore after that. That allows you at the end of the day to look copper actually at 0.05 mol HCl, which is what you want for labeling generally. So that has been a pretty nice improvement of the method. Zinc stays retained under these conditions, so you get a very nice and very pure copper. And again, we went to see Katie and Johan and GE, we tend to work quite a bit with that, and they've used that on a cassette and actually will optimize it really. And again, the most important optimization step that we're throwing at that is the rinsing step with sodium chloride and HCl, just to make sure that the copper that you get at the end of the day is really about 0.05 mol HCl, not something that is like 0.2, 0.3. So that is working really good. We have really quite good feedback on that. Mostly geochemistry groups are working on zinc separation or a sequential iron copper zinc separation on TK201, so it's going a bit in a different direction. And as I said, at the moment we're looking quite a bit into a copper separation, cobalt separation from nickel targets. I think already the TK201 as you can see, it looks quite nice. Problem is you need to load the cobalt at quite high acid concentration, which is really not suitable for any labeling work. So there's a couple of things that might be done. So that we're playing with maybe use 2 TK201, so dilute or purify the cobalt reacidify, go on TK201 again, maybe a smaller one, then dilute acid, just have cobalt and pure cobalt in a lower acid concentration, or use a TVP before to get rid of iron and gallium, and then try to load with the acids. It's already done in the method by McVitie and Johan. Use the sodium chloride and HCl and see if that is something that we could use for labeling already. So there's a bit of work going on cobalt. Usually copper separation is actually, we made a copper resin obviously to separate copper from things, from what type of matrices, mostly from related targets. So for copper 67, which is produced from zinc targets, the TK201 is not an option. As you've seen, the selectivity for zinc is much higher than for copper. So basically, the capacity would be taken up by zinc, and there would be no place anymore for copper. So there's no way to use TK201 for copper separation from zinc targets. That's where the copper resin comes back into play. Beautiful is it's really one of the most selective resins I would say that we have. The problem is that you have to load it from at least pH 2, better pH 3, maybe pH 4, which is typically not very well suited. It's a bit unfortunate when you're working with dissolved solid targets. They usually dissolve at strong HCl, so you need to go through the extra mile and evaporate the dryness, redissolve, something that you usually don't like to do. But in this case, it's unfortunately inevitable. After that, you can load the copper resin, then dilute in pretty strong HCl, which is again something that is not really very popular when it comes to, sorry for the suspense, for the labeling with copper 67, for example. So it's still used for large solid zinc targets. There's no other choice in terms of resins. It does work with liquid targets, liquid nickel targets. It doesn't really matter too much if the pH 2, pH 3. That's quite fine. It's a very nice publication from Copen and Wimbra that have been working copper 61 with the copper resin. So that is working quite nicely. But still, you are at the point that you lose with 6 molar HCl, for example. So basically, you just go back to TK201. Zinc has been removed. You just load it on TK201. You lose, maybe even including the sodium chloride HCl step, and then you have the copper 67 in the concentration of HCl, which is suitable for you. So that is increasingly being done as an application from Anta's group. And quite new one, that's like 2 or 3 days ago from Dresden. They're using a mixture of the copper resin for the initial separation, TK400, to take out any last traces of gallium. Since gallium separation is not quite as strong than for other elements, so you need an extra step to take out the gallium. They opted for TK400, just take the gallium out. Then the 600 shell goes to TK201, which you can then use for dilution under dilute acid conditions. So that's something that's getting to be used. So it's used quite in routine, which is quite nice. It's good to see we made the copper resin like 10, 15 years ago for copper separation in RadPharm application, and then now it's actually really finding use. So we've really been playing the long game on this one. What we're trying at the moment, but that's really just a Rolls-Royce kind of separation thing, to see if we can still squeeze in the copper resin into the copper 64 separation from solid nickel targets. It's basically doing a 3-column separation. We had a couple of questions on that for really extra pure copper at the end of the day. So we seem to have gotten it to work. It needs to be tested hot now. It's basically starts with 2 milliliter to 1 column for copper conversion to get it to a pH which is just working. We've been working on that one for ages, and it's really the introduction of the HCl sodium chloride step that helped us to get that to work. Then you load the copper in that state buffer. You end up at something higher than pH 2. So that's something you can load onto the copper resin, do your final purification, then you load with the as we get it smaller from each cartridge, 2 mil to 1 mil copper, And then the final one was 0.3 mil TK201 in order to elute the copper in a very small volume, thereby high purity. So again, cold that looked like that is going to work. Now this needs to be tested on a real sample at some point. Okay, so that finishes up in a way to end. So the imaging, copper 67 is therapy, but that part. And now moving to lanthanides. That's actually getting back a bit to the presentation also that Peter gave earlier in the conference. The TC177 is obviously the big one that everybody it's very highly sought after. Right now, the Terbium-161 is catching up quite strongly as it has a couple of interesting properties. So Terbium, a lot of advertisement from a Swiss group. So it's called a Swiss Army knife. And it's true, Terbium allows you to do alpha, SPECT, PET, and beta minus. So therapy with the same element. So it is quite intriguing. So it does have a couple of very interesting properties. The production is pretty much the same for the TB161, which is at the end of the day, so that's the one that's used in therapy. That's the one that's the most popular right now. 155 is pretty popular too, but 161 is really the one that's getting into industry, in real use, even into the hospitals right now. The way to produce is very similar to the TC177. You have highly enriched target, gadolinium, difficult to get, very expensive. You get it into a reactor, but preferably with a very high neutron flux. You get the gadolinium-161, decays to terbium-161. And you find yourself in a position where you need to separate terbium-161 from very large amounts of gadolinium, stable gadolinium that's there. You can't really convert everything. Same for lutetium. You need to do a lutetium-terbium separation. And that is, in terms of separation chemistry, one of the more trickier ones that we've encountered, especially as the requests are now going to 1 gram targets and higher than that. So basically, you have to separate an extremely small amount of a lanthanide from its neighboring lanthanide, which has extremely similar chemistry and is present in gamma amounts. So that's a really tough one to tackle. We've been working with PP columns, polypropylene columns, so prepacked columns. They are fairly large, and that's because they are so similar in terms of chemistry. Usually we're trying to set up a separation in a way that the resin collects the product and lets the target material pass. So that's what we usually aim for. That's not going to work here, only under very high difficulties. So that's something that we start to make commercially available too. So these are, not as you know, usually small cartridges. They're like 375 mil or 150 mil. So you're working with different sizes, different volumes, and typically it's a work that's performed with HPLC pumps, just to get the separation done under very well-defined conditions. We're using TK211, 12, 13 now. We had optimized this pretty much for these applications. They're based on, well, the same extractors actually than the DLM series. We've thrown in the Silex 572 into the mix, and we've mixed them up. So we've seen that for some separations, if you're not using just straight DHDAP, but you mix it with something else in the right ratio, you can gain a couple of % of selectivity for that, and that's in this case what you want. Use different polymer that's more resistant against radiation. We add more extractant to keep it more resistant against radiation. A bit of long-chain alcohol just as a radical scavenger. So really quite a lot of work in trying to optimize radiation stability on this resin, and on the other hand also selectivity and capacity optimization. So I'm starting with the easy one. I'm not going to talk too much about lutetium. It's frustratingly complex. So the example we've been working on most of the work lately was about 1 gram gadolinium targets, which is fairly large, but we really need to work on larger ones at some point. Typically, after radiation, they dissolved in 3 molecular acid, which is not working. If you want to do a separation on LMs or resins or TK211, 1230, you need to load from dilute acid. So the first step is TK2 to 1 for the conversion. I'll get back to that a little later, why we use this and not the TKI resin. Then we try to implement sequential separations. Again, we need to get to very, very high decontamination factors on the elements that are very, very similar, so we need several columns to get there. And in order to simplify, we're trying to do some sequential separations. Basically, what you can do is you can start with the least acidic, in a way, LN resin or TK213, so LN3 or TK13. You load at that very, very dilute conditions. You perform a separation, which is usually done at a K prime of 20 or 30. And you see that you can, for example, remove your target material, elute, in this case, terbium, the terbium directly onto a resin, which is a little more acidic. So you have very high retention under conditions that's already diluted from the first one. So there's no step in between where you have to convert and get back to dilute acid and load onto the resin. You're really going step by step from in the order of the acidity of the resin. So uptake on the still dilute acid, a bit higher than you load. You do a separation again at conditions where the K prime is 20, 30, something like that. And then when you get to the fraction you want, you directly load it onto another one. And, well, not, it's 3 is already plenty. They never managed to find a system where they could actually go for the 3, but we found a system that's the terbium where you can work with TK212, which is in terms of sensitivity here, but it's like the 2 resin, and TK211, which is a bit like the resin. But the method is still fairly complicated because you need a lot of several columns, but it is much less complicated than the lutetium method, which uses at least twice as many columns. So that looked quite fun. So when you do the actual separation, again, we have a lot of material in large columns. So in order to make it worthwhile and compatible with what you do in an industrial production of the terbium, you need very high flow rates. So we generally try to stick to like 15 mil per minute, at least now. As soon as we go to higher targets, we need even larger columns, then we need to go to about 14 mil per minute or something. That's some we figured out. But it's already been done for lutetium, and that's working still quite nice. So high flow rates, still getting a good separation. This is a cold test, ICP-MS, just getting fractions analyzed by ICP. You get rid of the gadolinium fairly quickly in 0.3 molar nitric acid, so that's the 1 gram of gadolinium. There will still some traces be left, but that's something we can take care of next. Then you switch to 0.5 molar nitric acid. You get your terbium fraction. What we tend to suggest if in the ideal world you have radiation detectors, you really follow this curve, and as soon as it starts, you switch, you load directly at TK211. When it's eluted, you stop. Then you just go to waste because that's when dysprosium is coming, and you want to have a terbium dysprosium separation. So that works very well. So gold we've been up to a gram, and I think our tests have been done to 300 milligram. Then what we do is basically load it directly onto TK211. The conditions are just such that the gadolinium is already breaking through to a certain extent during the load. You then rinse with water until all is fun. You will want to collect it for recycling because it's really quite expensive. Then there's 2 options. In the beginning, we tried to do a second terbium dysprosium separation, which is working, but at the end of the day, after discussion, it's not necessary. So what you do here is you elute with like 3 molar nitric acid. You elute it on a small cartridge of TK221. It's concentrated, and then you elute the terbium in maybe 5-6 milliliter. So you're getting from a really quite large amount of liquid down to about 5 ml of terbium 161 in high purity. Was something, we'll get back to it later. We also passed it through an anion exchanger just to remove some effects of nitrate, but there are other ways of doing it. And another project that we have is get optimize a method on the cartridge. After you've shipped the terbium, the dysprosium is going back to decay. So some groups prefer to have a second terbium dysprosium separation when the sample arrives. That seems to be something that we figured out with a small cartridge. Not perfect, but it would seem good. So that's some last optimization steps. Really just to show, so you can use this kind of sequential separation also in the deuterium separation for purely time and volume reason. It makes no sense to do it at the beginning. It really only makes sense at the end of the day. What we've seen though in the medicinal type of separation, much more important for terbium, if you add about 10%, you can do more or less, but we found 10% is a good compromise, into the solutions that you use for the chromatographic separation. It was actually working really much better on TK212 and 211. You improve the separation of the lanthanides extremely, really, it's quite impressive. It improved a couple of percent, which, given the price of the final product, is very huge. So we improved the separation very, very strongly of the lanthanides just by adding some ethanol into the solutions that are used for the separation. And Phil Warwick is actually trying that at one for analytical application. And it would seem it's the same. It's quite beneficial to add ethanol into your solutions sometimes. You don't want to do it in strong nitric acid and you just get brown fumes and a destroyed laboratory. That's probably not much appreciated. I just come back very quickly to the TK225 resin. So even if you do a very good separation, you collect all your waste, you recover all of your gadolinium, or your terbium material, because the virtual material that you get is not perfect, you will also get some europium, some other radioactive lanthanides that will be separated that you need to remove at some point. And we got a couple of questions on that, and actually the TK225 resin, to be quite frank, has been a failed experiment in the laboratory. We thought that mixing ionic lipids and DHA, we could do some fancy stuff about lanthanide separation. That did not work at all because the TK212, that's the prototype of resin, didn't let the lanthanides out. We tried to look at no way with the strong complexing agents, but really not with the acid or water. So we put it on the shelf and forgot about it until we got a question from somebody who actually needs to remove all type of lanthanides, the heavy ones, the not so heavy ones, medium ones. And we shipped them a sample of this one. And it worked better than DHA, better than cement resin. So you should never throw away your failure. It can still be of some use at some point. I think we've never sold so much resin so quickly compared to the TK225 resin. But really, pretty much mono application at the moment is really just effluent decontamination of nuclear medicine departments that are producing lutetium or terbium. But as Ods mentioned, it does look quite nice for calcium actually. So we'll have a very close look on using it for calcium separation. And if you look here, so in dilute acid it takes up yttrium very, very strongly, so which is something that not too many resins do actually. Besides catalytic exchanges. So that might be an option. And you can see that there's actually a lot of the matrix elements are not retained from that conditions. So it might be selective-ish for yttrium for ice. So it might be worth a shot. Okay, still a few slides left. But as you get into one, I don't want to elaborate too much. As Uta has shown, it is quite intriguing in terms of it has a better uranium retention than DHA and better ablation retention than true resin, so it's a bit in the middle, which makes it, I think, interesting for some NPCs, where you would require higher grid primes for both of these elements. So we'll see for that with Nora. But the real application or the real reason why we developed that was really that while DHA is very good in concentrating lanthanides and then diluting them, especially for lutetium, we found that the dilution volume needed is too high. So we needed to find a way to improve that, and it turned out that by just taking DHA, mixing that with the phosphine oxide, you can get lutetium to dilute much faster from the TK221. So that's really the real reason why we make resin. At the moment, to be honest with pharma, quite often we have very clear-cut questions that we need to find a solution for. Then after that, we start checking if there's anything like for the TK2. But the real reason was a quick release of lutetium after pre-concentration from the cars, like the TK2 12 to 11 cars. And right now, because that's what everybody is looking to, checking if there's any point, any interest in using that for actinium-225, which is very well separated from using the TKI resin. So really, is there anything additional that it brings to the table for actinium separation? So Laura Weiner was kind to get us a couple of get framed of the antibodies. Okay. So basically, what you see, that's already a big difference to the TKI resin. And it's really not possible to remove the TK221 in terms of actinium in dilute nitric acid. It will stick, it would seem. Verified currently, it's the same. You do get to see a drop of retention when you get to very high acid concentrations. That's something that's actually used for the separation of actinides from actinium from lanthanides. Much stronger retention in nitric acid than from HCl. And overall, it's much sharper, so you do get good retention of actinium, then it drops quite sharply as you reduce the acid concentration, and the same as you increase the acid concentration. So there might be something that can be used. At the moment, we're working on like a two-step, or there's two cases. People that need to separate actinium from lanthanides, not very many ways of doing that. So each layer to get to the one might be a way. And people that don't need to do it. We're looking at loading one method that would work for both. So loading from like formal nitric acid, actinium will stick, lanthanides will stick. You remove a lot of lead and strong silver at that moment, which is very important, especially lead. Then you elute, as we've seen with very, very strong nitric acid, you can elute the actinium, and you can keep the lanthanides on the resin, so you get a separation of both. You re-dilute, you either load on another TK221 or TK222. You can additionally remove strong impurities that are present. You can elute bismuth that is interfering, and then elute your actinium in dilute acid, which is suitable to molar or 0.05 molar, which is then suitable for labeling, or mostly labeling. So that's something that's going on where we feel that we're already getting close to a method that's working quite fine. We have a new resin, TK222, which we'll present in a few minutes, that might be actually a little better for that step, because it will, as it seems, elute actinium in a smaller volume, and everybody wants to have smaller volumes for the dilution of the final product. So it's really just the proof experimentally. You cannot dilute the actinium in 10 molar nitric acid. You need to go to at least up 12 molar, and you can't dilute it in dilute nitric acid, which is on the other hand interesting. So if you receive your actinium in dilute nitric acid, you would prefer to have it in HCl, as is often the case. Before you go to the labeling step, you can actually use TK221, load from dilute nitric, then you load in dilute HCl, just to resalt in a way and remove your nitrates. Solution in 0.05 on HCl works quite fine, but again, we had feedback, and it should be a bit sharper still from TK222, so it might be a more suitable choice in that special application. And yes, TK222. I will not bother you with all of the graphs. You have a lot of graphs, a lot of data. It is way too much, even for these. It really just the general tendency, a very strong retention of prevalent lanthanides, prevalent in general. It's not surprising. This one is a mixture of pH, so the branch HA and phosphonol side. So very high retention in high nitric acid, which is interesting in terms of separation of lanthanides from actinides. So we need to see there's a bit of a drop here too, but still the values is in order of 10,000. So should even at 12 molar shouldn't be too bad. But it's for retention of yttrium and scandium. That's certainly elements that we will look into very, very closely. Generally, tetravalence, zirconium, hafnium, very, very well retained. And uranium, thorium, very well retained. Illusion of uranium will be quite tricky, so it might be another one of these resins, but it might be possible just to load uranium directly from IH2 or to the resin to pre-concentrated. Thorium probably not going to work. So this for nitric acid, and for hydrochloric acid, the picture is really quite similar. It's just the drop in terms of selectivity as the acid concentration is diminished. It's much, much steeper, especially for the lanthanides, which is an indication that the lanthanide elution from TK222 should be a good deal sharper than it is from TK221. But yeah, in dilute HCl, same scandium look very interesting, so we certainly have a look at that. That overlap is also well retained. And uranium thorium, again, pretty well retained, that's no surprise. We have a couple of data on actinium. So it retains actinium just well fine, 9 molar, about 500. So that's pretty good. And here too, you see that the selectivity for actinium drops very sharply as you diminish the acid concentration. So that's a good indication that the elution of the actinium in dilute HCl should work very fine. We can't really work with actinium, so we have to work with outside groups. That takes a little bit more time. I was hoping to show some data on actinium, so that's probably going to happen at the next one. In between, we've been playing around a bit with lutetium separation. That's just nice to show. So if you load lutetium on a TK221 from nitric acid, you rinse with dilute H103 to remove some impurities, lower the acid concentration. Then you load the B grade, which is 100 to 200 micrometer resin. You get a fairly broad elution. As you move to 50 to 100 at the same flow rate, you get a much sharper elution. So diminishing generally the particle size, keeping the flow rate the same, is going to give you a sharp elution. That is nicely proven, kind of restated here. So the TK221, if you do the same, you're actually getting a very nice and very sharp elution. So that really goes back to what we've seen before. It seems that the elution is very good. And as long as you load from high nitric and high HCl, also the retention should be quite fine. So that's pretty good case to be made that TK222 might be a very good alternative for TK221 in the lutetium and in the terbium processes. So that's something we're looking into a bit further. And then another thing, that's something that is really quite crucial. When you do your elution of the lutetium or the terbium, you want to be sure that your nitrate concentration is as low as possible. So basically, we've been running the same separation, just added one rinsing step with 1 molar HCl. And you see that on all cases, TK221, E grade and T grade, the peak is getting much narrower. So even small amounts of nitrate that are still left after rinsing it and re-blowing out the nitric acid is going to make your elution of the lanthanides broader. If you go on extra step and rinse with HCl to remove the nitrate, you get a much sharper elution, which is interesting. Unfortunately, if you do it with TK222, 1 mole is already too low, you just lose your lutetium in that case. So you need to rinse with 3 molar, which is at the end of the day not hoping, because then your final product is going to be very highly acidic. Okay, that's one of the last topics as well. Besides the lanthanides, it's really actinium-225 that is having the biggest interest in RadPharm. And of all of the routes that most people are asking for at the moment is irradiation of radium-226 in the sector. Now, there's a couple of problems. People don't have radium, so they need to buy it or find it. And then quite often what they find are brachytherapy needles, which contain a lot of stuff, barium, platinum, iridium. So that's something that needs to be removed. We're still working on a radium resin, and I have a bit hope that the next huge year we have something, a resin that can extract radium from high acid, hopefully nice selectivity, and then dilute in dilute acid. So that's one of our main projects at the moment. In between, you have to figure out other ways. So basically, in an ideal world, the radium you buy or the radium that you get after irradiating is only containing radium and a couple of impurities. So the ideal solution would be just take the radium in solution and keep it in solution, run it to a couple of resins, TK221, for removal of other alpha emitters, and TK 1 or 2 for removal of iron, lead, especially these two, and strontium. And again, the TK102 was really tailored to be as good as we could for this particular application. Try to get the radium-barium separation as well as possible. So we really tried to find a way to push the barium retention higher while not touching on the radium retention. So that seems to have worked. That's what is already shown. Radium still goes through during loaded rinse. Barium starts to break through on the Strontium resin fairly quickly and actually looks very quickly. And it's much better. Not perfect, but it's much better for the TK102. So that is one thing. And another thing, it is using a different solvent, diluent, that's very hydrophobic, so you have much less bleeding, which is always a bit of a struggle in the pharma world if you have a lot of bleeding of organic material, and this solvent does not bleed much. It's really quite low and what you see in the diluent. The main work that we're doing on radium at the moment is really TK101. We've been testing that against a couple of others, PLEX, TK100. It is in a way similar to the TK100s, but we replaced the HDAP, which is doing a good job, but it's really extracting everything with the ionic liquid. Same chromy as the 102, as the Strontium resin. So basically what we're seeing is you get very, very high radium retention at low acid concentration. Then things are getting quite interesting when you move into higher acid concentrations. That's again data that we got from yeah, so it's local data. But you see, as long as you stay below, let's say 0.1 molar, you get very high retention of barium, radium, a couple of other stuff, lead, as we see in a minute, cesium, which is not really a problem in that special case, but not sodium and calcium. So as long as you stay in that general direction, you can extract radium barium to both very strongly on the resin. And as you move on to high nitric acid, it's a bit difficult to see. As long as you stay at about 3 molar nitric acid, you still get a fairly good retention of barium, and you can elute the radium. It's basically what we've been doing. And if you look at the general selectivity of the TK101, there's really no transition metals retention. A bit of bismuth, but you can get rid of that. Very strong lead retention. You need strong HCl to elute it. So the 101 is all as shown today in the conference is really actually quite suitable for extracting lead. I mean, in HCl you go up to 10 or 5 for the KT, which is really not bad at all. You still can do it. So it's quite nice. And one of the scintillating beads, impregnated PSM that we're working on is going to be a TK101 version for lead. Okay, so radium separation of TK101 is one of the last series slides. We've tried that cold, quite a couple of elements, barium, platinum, iridium, radium platinum from Noramita, cerium as platinum for actinides. So basically what you see is you can tweak in the loading to rinse for pretty much all of the matrix. The only elements that are sticking is barium, radium, obviously, lead and strontium, and thallium to a certain extent. Then you lose 3 molar nitric acid, you get your clean radium fraction, which is really what we're after at the moment. And then you can get your barium. So the barium radium separation is not too bad. If you have a lot of radium, you will get tailing, and your separation will not be perfect. So it might be a good idea to take this fraction, 3 molar nitric acid, and just wash it through TK102 to remove the last traces of barium. But overall, we're fairly happy with how that radium separation looks. Not ideal for sure, but it is by far the best that we have found so far, and it looks quite suitable for the application. Okay, yeah, just a quick reminder, there's been a lot of talk about the TK202 resin. Don't really want to get back into that. So used for technetium 99M from Optim cyclotron small demand, or from molybdenum serrated in the reactor. So two applications, C8 and aluminum oxide might be really quite helpful in terms of purity and how you receive. What we've been playing now, just because, is just to check if you can also use that for the separation of rhenium from tungsten. And we had a question on that. Rhenium is sometimes used in nuclear medicine. So it's not only working for technetium, then you can also use it. Rhenium is not a surprise, but tungsten is also a pleiotropic anion, which is working good enough. So that might be interesting in some cases. Okay. Don't really want to talk too much about these DJ sheets. You know already that's a cooperation with the Prague University. Basically, they're still producing and we just reselling it. It is a nifty product. We were thinking about making it, they were just faster. They did a very good job developing these. So basically, you spot on your actinium, you let your torque solution. You run it like a TLC, and then you do a TLC scan for your radionuclidic purity. Quality control, which is very interesting, but it's a limit because it's only radionuclidic QC. Still, we're making other ones for similar questions, but so these are really more for radionuclidic purity. The last one, that's again a cooperation with GE, that is going a bit into a different direction. This is the TAC that is supposed to separate, and it does, fortunately, free copper from labeled copper. So basically, the test is quite usually done on not just standard TLC paper or the whiteboard paper. As you see, so in the graph you see free copper. And example 1 is pretty much just free copper. Example 2 is a mix of free copper and labeled copper. So you see that the peaks are either quite large. They actually tend to be quite large. And in addition, the whiteboard, which kind of works okay-ish, takes quite a long time, 25 to 30 minutes to develop. So we've seen taking one of the standards was the ITLC the material, we impregnate that with the copper resin extractant. We get a very sharp separation of free copper from the that has actually become quite popular. We've sent out quite a lot of samples because it is fast. You can do the separation on a 10 centimeter strip, takes about 10 minutes to develop. Again, if you are in a TSC kind of setup, 10 minutes is really not that bad at all for 10 centimeters. And yeah, for 1 minute. So you get good separation, clean TSC scan, and it takes about 10 minutes. So that is really quite nice. And so we sent an example of that to a group in Australia who's doing mass spec of copper isotopes. And they will test these as test tips for copper, just trying to see how this is working. But again, the uptake is different. You might have some kind of diffusion. You really have to develop the district potentially. Or maybe if you just get it in, it diffuses in quite quickly. So I think that kind of material can be a quite good candidate for testing. And then we'll certainly send you some as soon as we have more samples. So for copper, that worked very well. I think that's going to be correct in a reasonable amount of time, second half of the year, I would say. And at the moment, we're testing other extractors on the same type of support for the same type of application. So moving away just from radionuclidic impurity purity control to a rapid test, free versus labeled radionuclide, which just changes things a little bit. Some other ongoing projects, I'm going to be very quick on that. Ready over my time as usual. We need to upscale the length of separations. 1 gram is nice, but we get questions up to 5 gram and more. So that's going to require some time. Zirconium, scandium, astatine separation is still something that we're working on. And especially Auger emitters are getting very popular in the radiopharmaceutical chemistry. So antimony, stretch chemistry, palladium, mercury is a tricky one to do. So that's something that we're working on. Selenium resin, that's our white whale since a long time. We always seem to be just about there, and then there's something not quite right. So we're getting closer. So selenium separations is definitely on our radar. Decommissioning, nuclear medicine, geochemistry, realisability, obviously. But also that's something that Maximilian has already indicated with at some point, because there were so many radionuclides used. in nuclear medicine, increasingly, it's mostly still a fairly long half-life, like 10 days or so. There is an interest in understanding what's happening with them in the environment, fairly rapid methods to quantify them in the environment. And a lot of that might go through in-field preconcentration, either using impregnated membranes and in-field filtration, or the same with cartridges. So that's something that is pretty high on our list for laboratory applications. Rapid tests, that is from the decommissioning side, that's a big one. So as already discussed, we have a range of impregnated PSM resins like the TKI synth. That's for sure. I think there's like 2 or 3 under the works right now. Testings is something we like very much. So on the one hand, for mass spectrometry, rapid test mass spectrometry, isotope ratios, but anything that you guys are doing is of really high interest for us. Generally, separation of DTM. We didn't talk much about that this time. Passage sampling is also something that's really quite interesting in. TK100 resins, so a couple of things going on. A lot of that is also based on the use of discs. As you've understood, there's going to be a range of impregnated membranes that is going to come up later this year, probably. Decontamination, then some fun stuff like microfluidics. It's already 2 PhD teasers, students that were working on that, or we have helped them more on the analytical side. But yeah, that's probably where we're going to stick. But so there might be applications for microfluidics are really quite interesting. And then a couple of other geometries, but it's really quite often going into how can I get a very quick picture, is there a lot or not? So rapid testing is really one of the big topics for us right now. With that, I thank you very much for your attention. I just need some people when you complete actually. Yeah, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions if there are any. I can cut myself. That would be good.
I have a question.
Okay, okay.
Okay, this is pretty strange because we are next door. I mean, we are next desk. So
next desk, yeah.
So if I understand correctly, for the radium separation, it would be first on the TK101 resin, and then to ensure the full purity of the radium fraction, it will go through the TK102 to be sure that there's no barium left in the radium fraction. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
The problem is really a lot of the sources that you can get use barium as a carrier for the radium. So
yes, of course.
Yeah. Yourself with hundreds of milligrams, so even one shot through the TK102 might not be enough. You might have to do that a couple of times. But yeah, that's the way we're thinking at the moment. It might be that we find a very nice radium resin that is doing a marvelous job at separating both, but until we have that, we stick to.
Okay, but that's a good combination. I mean, if it works.
Right now, it looks really quite promising.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. And have a nice end of the day over there.
Yeah.
Enjoy. Thank you.
That's for sure. Okay. Are there any other questions? So as I mentioned in the beginning, we will ask all of the presenters at the time to give us the slides already. If this is the case, we'll upload them on our website. And if they also agree to give us the right to pictures, so that we use the recording, video recording, we will get that up on our YouTube channel at some point. That's probably going to take a little bit more time. I don't think there are any more questions, and we have kept you already quite long. So thank you very much for joining us, audience committee participants, and a very, very special thank you to all of the presenters. So now give a round of applause. And yeah, thank you very much for joining. And I think we'll do something similar November 24. I can give you to understand. Yes. I mean, the hybrid version, which worked quite nice. A couple of technical bugs in the beginning, but I think now we know. So there's a good chance that we do that again 2024. In between, we'll get back to the in-person school meetings whenever that is possible. Okay. So again, thank you very much, and have a very nice evening. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Okay, now we have to stop.
Leave button.
Yeah. You pass that.